You want to grow faster than me? You want to make more money than me? Just use other people.
We've unleashed Pandora's box.
The people who are going to be violated the most are going to be service workers and the underclass.
It incentivizes dishonesty at scale.
I did not manage my relationships well. You know, I cheated on...
America's Got Talent and MasterChef rejected him. TikTok censored him. But you, the viewers, saved him. And now over 10 million of you follow Scumbag Dad for his critiques against fake social media content, helping him become a full-time creator. Today, he shares takes on SSSniperWolf, xQc, and MrBeast, as well as why staged content is never okay, how to live a moral life in a fake world, and how his personal relationships drove him to become a better person.
I find myself constantly going against what I consider to be disingenuous content. And the last time we talked a lot about like exploitative content and weird people who don't present themselves authentically, but still rack up millions and millions of views and presumably a lot of money through this. And what I've sort of realized is that I'm not really fighting individuals. I'm going against what I think is like a major cultural shift. I think what's happened is that the MrBeast generation is growing older and they want to be celebrities. I'm not saying I dislike MrBeast, but what has happened is throughout most of history, celebrities had to accomplish something through exceptional skill. So you had to be a good sports player or great pianist or singer or dancer, you know, whatever. You had to demonstrate presumably a certain amount of skill. And with YouTube and with the MrBeast formula, they've introduced a way to become famous essentially by co-opting your content to other people, by creating scenarios that rely on other people's reactions to be the content rather than your own creation. You know, one of MrBeast's first incredibly viral videos was him just handing 10 grand to a homeless guy. And that reaction, that very candid reaction became one of the cornerstones of his entire career. And what people are realizing when you grow up with this kind of content, you don't think, oh, I've got to become a better singer or I've got to become a better dancer to be famous. You start to think, I've got to come up with another way to make other people the focus of my video. And there are moral ways to do this. There are ways that are at least morally gray. And then there are ways of doing that that are, in my opinion, objectively evil. And for as much as MrBeast has done to like promote charity and giving and sort of like promote positivity, a lot of bad actors can take elements of that equation and apply it in a very selfish way to fool the audience into either giving them money or thinking they're a nice guy.
What's interesting, you mentioned that in a previous age of celebrity, you had accomplished something real world worthy. Hey, I'm an Olympic swimmer. Hey, I'm a Michelin star chef. Well, let's talk about Hollywood actors and actresses. In a way, they're also just doing content, putting themselves in inauthentic situations that feel authentic and realish, looking for reactions from the people around. What's the difference between them versus the new generation who are doing the same thing just on the street with a handheld camera?
So I feel like accountability is one of the big answers to that question. When Leonardo DiCaprio is in the movie Titanic, he is acting. There is no indication to the viewer that this really happened. It's shot in amazing quality. It's advertised as a piece of fiction put together by the crew.
Based on historical fact, though, in this case with the Titanic. So there's an element of truthiness and authenticity.
There's an element of truthiness, but they never say this actually happened. Whereas the new generation, with their ability to sort of film everything handheld, to go out in the street, is that they're blending the fictional world with the real world. And they're selling an idea that this really happened. When it's anything but. If I made a movie about a disabled kid who gets discovered by an influencer, and as a result, they get to meet their favorite drummer, you would watch it as a movie. And your emotional impact would be probably not that much because it's presented to you as a work of fiction. But then if I film it with a cell phone, script the entire thing, and pretend like it's real, the audience's emotional investment is much higher because they think that this thing really happened. So the difference between a Hollywood actor crafting a scene and the difference between an influencer crafting a scene is that one of them lets you know that it was never real. But the other one will let you think it's real to increase your level of interest and your engagement, even if it may be dishonest.
It was fascinating. Recently, Michael Lewis wrote this book called The Blind Side. A movie was produced off it. Sandra Bullock starred in it. And it's this very heartwarming story where you spoke about, oh, if I created a story about a disabled person being picked up by an influencer, The Blind Side is about a person of color who is plucked out of what the movie implies, but in a much more difficult, hard life, into the bosom and warm embraces of a white family who sponsor him, and he becomes a professional NFL football player. Very sentimental movie. The football player that the movie was based off recently came out and said it is all bullshit. The author made this up. I was exploited by that family and is currently the star, the protagonist of The Blind Side, is suing the family depicted in that movie who took him in, saying that they actually withheld his earnings.
We obviously see what's wrong with that scenario, right? Like when you present a supposedly true story as fiction, you trick the audience into trusting you. You trick them into opening up their wallets into giving you money. So I think that's a really excellent example of how Hollywood, or sort of like a manipulative person, can take the idea of a true story and use it to profit. And it's becoming, sadly, it's becoming easier and easier to trick people with the proliferation of TikTok, with the proliferation of, what they call kindness influencers. It's so much easier to fake a story about charity or about goodness than it is to create a Hollywood picture about the same thing. You can take any actor or any situation and make it into like a very Dhar Mann. We talked about Dhar Mann last time. You can make it into this very heartwarming story with very, very, very little effort, very little resources. In order to make Titanic, one of the big conversations I have is people say, oh, you get mad when people fake scenarios on the street, but why aren't you mad at movies? And I'm like, guys, Titanic was not a documentary. Die Hard was not a snuff film. If I told you, I just saw 9 people get a video, you'd be like, oh my God, that's horrible. And then I showed you Die Hard with Bruce Willis, you would say, well, of course people got, you would have no emotional reaction because you knew it was Hollywood. Whereas if I show you a video of like war footage where people actually, presumably get murdered, your emotional engagement's much higher. You can't believe this monstrous thing actually happened. And that's what I try to explain to people is that if a situation is faked to improve your emotional engagement, then it is not the same as a Hollywood movie. You know what I mean? You can separate that with yourself, but if you knew that scene was scripted when you first saw it, you wouldn't cry, you wouldn't be sad about it because all those actors are fine. It was just special effects. And I feel like in a way we're regressing as a result of it.
It's almost a concern from the storyteller, the filmmaker, that, hey, the suspension of disbelief, well, that suspension is a lot of work. That's going to get in the way of the message I'm trying to tell. So let's not worry about suspending. You don't need to disbelieve in the first place. Just believe it's real. And I'm going to expand your point. The same thing you said initially in the last podcast, you spoke about individuals, and now you're seeing this as a broader symptom. I think everyone now these days, not just TikTokers, but filmmakers, authors, comedians, is thinking more about how can I ensure the story is emotionally truthful more than anything. And I think there's different levels of this manipulation. So we talked a bit about The Blind Side of Michael Lewis. I'd put that on what I call the Rashomon level of deception. Rashomon, as you may be familiar, is a piece of Japanese cinematic art where an incident occurs and it's described 5 different ways by 5 different people. Each person genuinely believes in the story that they saw. When folks went back to Michael Lewis and said, hey, you realize the story depicted in The Blind Side was manipulated and not true. The protagonist is literally suing the family that adopted him. Michael said, basically, that's not how I took it. It was, I don't think that his story is right. My story is the right one. My POV is the right one. There's a level beyond that, though, where they know it's not true. They acknowledge it's not true, but they think it's worth it for the sake of the story. And I'm going to pick an example not from social media. I'm going to pick Hasan Minaj, Patriot Act.
Good example. Hasan Minaj. What do you think about the Hasan Minaj situation?
His stand-up is extremely personal. He's shared growing up as a person of color in the post 9/11 era, how FBI agents would infiltrate his place of worship to try and trick him And when he decided to play around and say, I want to be a pilot, that they apparently threw him against a car and tried to arrest him. That after doing a stand-up set on the Patriot Act, he was mailed, apparently, a white powdery substance, to the point where his wife said, I don't care if you're a big influencer, I'll leave you if you keep putting us at risk. He even shares the story as a person of color, asking a white girl out to prom, only to be ghosted when he gets to prom and sees her with another man. And all of this is not true. And unlike Michael Lewis, who said, no, well, there are different stories and POVs, and mine is the one I believe is true, Hasan openly admits 30% of this is all made up. Now, for being a little less charitable, these incidents are wholly, transparently not true. But he justifies it saying, but the messages around what he's conveying are so important that it was worth it.
I highly disagree. I think that if you have to go out of your way to create fake stories about your own oppression, then you're just not that good a storyteller. You're working to embed stereotypes and biases more deeply into our society. And what you're doing will be a net positive for you, but it will be a net negative for a society that wants to trust people. I had a conversation recently where I compared Hasan Minaj to Anthony Jeselnik, who's one of my favorite stand-up comedians. And Anthony Jeselnik, when he tells a story, the punchline is so over the top that it's a lie. Like, there's constant wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, if for you to believe Anthony Jeselnik's stories, you are very stupid, because that is truly meant to be stand-up comedy. Whereas Hasan Minaj, it's not difficult for him to make up a story about oppression because we want to believe it's true. Who would make up a story like that? What kind of monster would make up a story about racism negatively affecting his life? It's just so far from any moral grounding. We come back to the Joey Salad's Trump car, which I think I mentioned last time. The Joey Salad's Trump car is a social experiment where he drove a car filled with Trump bumper stickers into a black neighborhood, and people beat up the car. But they were all actors, it was all staged, and he gained a lot of views because he was pushing a narrative of racism, and which resonated with a lot of people. It was very, whether you believed in the video or not, it's a very inflammatory video. And when you make up stories and straight-faced pretend them to be true, we want to trust you. We want to believe in it. But because we think it's true, we're going to be a lot more engaged. Another amazing example is that recently an influencer was called out for lying about how much charity he was giving out. He would say he was buying 1,000 burgers and then only buy 10. He would film the cashier, they would tell the price, and he would edit it in such a way that he portrayed to the audience he was giving out thousands of dollars worth in food. But a couple people caught on. They were like, you're leaving with one bag. You're only giving around 5. Like, if you're buying 1,000 tacos as an influencer, there is no way you're not taking a video of the 1,000 tacos. There's no way you're not taking a video of your car filled with food. But this guy, he lied to his audience, and people were engaged. He went viral because they believed it. But once he was called out, he had to do an apology video. And the whole debate is, well, at least he's doing something. And to me, this is absolutely the wrong way of viewing it. I mean, filming homeless people for charity is bad enough, but then lying about scale is like a new level of insanity. And now that's what I mean when I say I'm fighting a cultural shift, is that the shift is starting to go towards people aren't even caring if the content creator is honest anymore. They're willing to do all of these crazy mental acrobatics to defend that little hit of serotonin that they received when they saw the content. Because if they know that influencer is actually a weird, manipulative person, that challenges their emotions. It's like I've attacked them. It's kind of like when I'm not sure if you've ever experienced this, but if you go to a friend and you say, hey, your girlfriend's cheating on you, whether it's true or not, they're going to react very viscerally. They'll be defensive. Maybe you've got proof. Your girlfriend's cheating on you. Here's the proof. They're going to be like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're attacking their happiness in that moment. And I feel that when I make fun of these influencers, I'm attacking a major shift in the individual's perception of what honesty is. And I'm a little sad about that, because where do you draw the line? I made a skit about this where the influencer says he's going to buy 1,000 plates of pasta, but then changes the order to 10. Another character gets mad at him. Then he changes the order to one plate of pasta. He changes the order to one plate of pasta. Somebody gets mad at him again, and then somebody defends him like, what have you ever done? And then he buys one piece of pasta. So I guess my question, what I challenge the audience of that content to is, when would you get mad? How big a scale can I lie about? If I say I'm going to feed 10,000 homeless people, but I only feed one and I keep the rest of the money for myself, are you still happy with that? Are you okay with the fact that I've deceived you and I've essentially profited off of your attention? It shouldn't be that way. You know, if you're the mayor of my town and you say, we're going to build 1,000 new roads to allow access to these areas, we're going to clear up all the traffic. And then you say, here's our proposal for one road, and that's it. I would be like, why are you lying to me? You said 10,000 roads. We only got one road. Would you really come at me with, well, at least we're doing something? I mean, it's kind of crazy.
So how authentic does it need to be? For instance, I recently went to a screening of a film capturing North Korean refugees fleeing from North Korea. And it's extremely compelling, moving piece of cinema. And the number one question the audience had, because the filmmakers, the directors were there, was, hey, I'm really confused. How did you film this footage? Like, I'm watching. You see these families like walking through the mountains and they're like hiding in these sheds. And you can't help but think, so like there's a camera crew. Like they're clandestine, secretly trying to escape the North Korean regime. And there's just like 3 guys with cameras walking around with them. And they were essentially like, yeah, honestly, it was a huge risk, but we had to do it to get the content out there because it promotes awareness. And I was thinking about this and I was like, okay, 1, that makes sense. 2, it's very scary because it actually puts them a little bit at risk to have the cameras there. And that's why the North Korean refugees had to agree. 3, well, in the editing, you're always going to emphasize or de-emphasize certain parts.
Yeah.
And so how true does it need to be?
Well, I guess here's my question. Were these cameras really in North Korea as they escaped, or were these filmed in a sound studio after the fact?
Apparently, they actually sent camera people live to follow the refugees along their escape, which this is what people were confused about, because it's like, here are people who are being monitored and they're trying to get away, but you have camera people there.
Oh man, that is a really interesting question. I think if you had the camera people there during the actual escape,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's a little weird, but it's being pretty honest. You're definitely altering the situation through your presence. If they're not actors, and the settings are not built in a soundstage, then what you're doing, I feel like, isn't that. Man, I gotta choose my words carefully. I feel like what you're doing isn't that morally bad. If you're actually capturing and doing respect for your subjects, and the subjects know you're filming. If the subjects are fully informed
Everyone's
of
consented. They took the risk. They agreed to be filmed because they knew to get the message out there more.
Then that's fine. Honesty is such an important thing, and it's so easy for influencers to bypass that. It's so easy for filmmakers to bypass that in order to tell an emotionally engaging story. It's so much simpler to build something in a soundstage rather than actually go out into the field, tell people what you're doing, and film them with a camera.
So let's say it was the exact same footage and content, but you and I know that it was created via AI, computer generated in a sound studio. But it actually did happen. It's just it wasn't filmed there. It was then later redepicted as an enactment.
As long as there is an indication to the audience
that this
somehow
is,
in context that this is not the actual footage, I don't see a problem with it. The problem would be is if they generated an AI and said, we have all real footage, this is all real, this all actually happened. And there's ways to portray that to the audience, like either through a disclaimer, through the marketing materials. I mean, you can tell people you don't have to say straight up, like, we made this all in AI, but there are context clues that you can use to say, hey, these are the real parts of the video and these are the fake ones. You know what I mean? As long as the audience isn't being lied to about what's fictional and what's non-fictional, I don't think the filmmaker is in any moral claims.
So I agree with you. You disclaim it, it's okay. And what terrifies me about this broader shift, you said was started inadvertently by MrBeast. We're in an age where there's just so much content out there. There's so little centralized, trusted sources that the algorithm decides what you see. You have every incentive to try and stand out in the algorithm and do something crazy. And in a way, MrBeast started it with all these sensational acts that get attention, except they're generally true as depicted. Although even Beast has run into controversy. Apparently, there's a piece he edited in a game show with other creators, and the person who actually won third, she was cut out of the footage, such it made it look like 3 other creators were placing.
I haven't looked into that, but I have heard about that. And so I feel like in that situation, like MrBeast, like maybe cracks are starting to show. You know, we don't know the ins and outs of his business. He may have started doing extremely sincere things, but as the business is changing, as he's progressing, like, we're all sort of affected by money, business, views. Like, these things can wear a person down. They can change them and make them different from their original artistic intent. You know, so if MrBeast really did edit someone out entirely, then yeah, he's lying to the audience, and that defies his initial MO. Does it make him a horrible person? I mean, if there's a huge pattern of this, then yes, he is deceiving his audience, and his image, you know, will be tainted. If it's a one-off with explanations we can't understand, like, there probably won't be any long-term consequences. When judging a creator and deciding if they're moral or not, I don't think it's right to judge them on just one video, because people can still make mistakes. You don't really know the background. I think it's important to look at patterns, you know, unless they've committed a crime, you know, on a video. Like, I think it's important to understand that nobody's perfect all the time, and nobody's evil all the time. A couple of evil acts done, you know, throughout somebody's career can indicate that someone was always lying. So, for instance, MrBeast edited this person out. If we find out more people have been edited out, I think that's going to strongly degrade his brand, and I think it's going to have financial impacts on him. But I feel like he's big enough, and he has so many fans, and he has so much trust, that if he manages this one well, it'll be water under the bridge, and he won't get hit too hard. But even if it gets hard, you know what? Cancellation doesn't really exist. You know, the idea that once you have enough followers, you can't really be hit that hard unless you commit a crime or, you know, do something inappropriate with a minor. Even Bentellect, you know, the guy who reads tweets and points at them, he was outed for being really creepy to women, like just really crazy. Women always make fun of men for getting overtly angry when they're rejected. And he did that. He asked OnlyFans models to do a podcast, but the podcast was just a way to lure them in to hang out. Then an hour before the podcast, he would, you know, propose them, you know, sexually. And when they rejected him, he would insult them. Oh, you dumb bitch, you're ugly, whatever. And so when one girl came out, more and more girls came out. And so he had to release an apology. And I was expecting, like, all right, this guy's done. His content is trash. He's gonna experience a hit off this. But after a couple of weeks, the audience forgot. He's got enough followers who just sort of like watching him point at tweets, and now it seems like he's doing just fine. Yeah. So MrBeast, like, even if this turns out really bad for him, he's still got such power and such influence that he could afford to lose a couple followers because he's gaining so many more each day.
It really goes to, like, the structural incentives the Kant system has made on us via algorithm. Not only do you feel pressure to make something sensational and stand out, which MrBeast generally is actually doing, but many other people, as you said, it's not 1,000 burgers, it's 10 burgers. There's a incentive to then not really change. I think SSSniperWolf is a great example. SSSniperWolf got in a lot of trouble for doxing Jack's films, or I suppose Jack's films, and her views are fine.
Yep, she's fine.
Yeah. There's
no reason for her to change because she's not going to experience any long-term financial ramifications. And that's, unfortunately or fortunately, that's simply the world we live in now, is that people don't realize that there's a billion other creators you could give your time and attention to. If I'm a SSSniperWolf fan and I find out she's doing all this stuff, blocking her or unfollowing her and following other people who have objectively more talent is going to make my life better. But why? We're so lazy. We're so like, we so don't care. A lot of people, once SSSniperWolf just revealed that she was just sort of a bad person, a lot of responses were like, yeah, well, she's hot though. Yeah, well, she bad. Yeah, well, I like her content, which is so insane to me because the folks who are saying this are the masses of people who don't make content. They don't understand how difficult it is to go viral. They don't understand how annoying and insulting it is when someone takes your video, no credit at all, reposts it, and makes 10 times more money than you did with that video. It's so crazy because it's like the social media is the only area of the world that this works. You know, if I build a house, right? If I'm an architect and I design a house, and a more powerful architect puts my house in their portfolio, I can sue them. I can be like, you didn't do that. You're advertising my house as yours. F you. Like every other industry in the world, apart from the directly creative ones, if you steal someone's stuff, there are ways that the original creator can get you. Whereas the audience of social media these days, they're so passive and so lackadaisical that if SSniperWolf makes 30 times the amount of money that I did with my video with no credit, they just don't care. If I post copyrighted music on YouTube, YouTube flags it, and I don't get any money from that. As it should be, right? If I took that person's music without their permission, I understand that that person needs money. Whereas if I just wholesale take somebody's video and react to it with my face on the bottom, I can make just as much money, if not more, than the original creator. And that's wrong. I've even made fun of this before. I took a guy who just put his face at the bottom of a viral video and I put my face over his face and I got more views than him and I made money off that video. And even though I'm just as gross for doing it, I'm trying to point out to the audience that like this is a very stupid thing. What is it? xQc, he's one of the most popular Twitch streamers. He just watches TikToks. In a way, it makes sense. It's a tale as old as time. Back in the day, there was eBaum's World, and then iFunny. Like throughout history, the aggregators will always outperform the individual creators because they don't respect the individual creators. Lad Bible, Barstool Sports, like all of these groups, whether you like them or not, they take from others under the guise of curation. And they make astounding profits because they don't need to take any time making the work. And the audience, being inherently lazy, doesn't care. They'd rather just sign on to a website that gives them the funniest stuff ever. And even if that website only pays a paltry sum to the influencers. Barstool Sports and Lad Bible have hit me up a dozen times. And I just say, look, give me some money. And they're like, nah, we're not authorized for that. Why not? There's an ad playing right under my video on your channel. You mean to tell me you can't spare $50, $100? And the truth is that they don't need to. They can just move on to the next influencer. They can move on to somebody without as much social media knowledge and just keep taking and taking and taking. And people think I'm joking. They're like, oh, I want to start a TikTok account. I want to do this. And they're like, how can I grow as fast as I can? And I say, look, you want to grow faster than me? You want to make more money than me? Just use other people. Just react to other people's content, film strangers on the street. There was a girl I was speaking to recently, and she wanted to start a makeup channel. And she's like, I want to start a TikTok. How can I make money at this? I'm like, well, your makeup work is good. You could just show before and afters of your work. But if you really want to do this, you should do makeovers to homeless people.
Yeah, people on the street.
And she was appalled. She was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to walk up to homeless people and make them be in my video. I'm like, well, I get that. I get that you don't want to do it. But you asked me a question. You said, how can I grow faster and start making money off this? And nothing is more valuable than using free actors off the street and using the sort of like, using the world's perception of charity. If you walk up to a homeless woman on the street, she probably doesn't have her hair and makeup done. So the effect of your makeover will be 1,000 times better than if you use your regular client. You just need to have the stomach for approaching a homeless person. You need to have the stomach for approaching someone in desperation and be okay filming them. And therein lies sort of where we're at, is that a lot of creators with no creativity will need to use the world around them for their content. This is why Target employees are the subjects of pranks. This is why Starbucks employees, waitresses, homeless people, is because they're always there. When I need to do a skit, I need to call up 4 of my friends. I need to figure out where we're meeting. I need to, we need to plan a day around it. It's not easy to get a good skit going when it's totally fiction. But if I'm the kind of guy who wants to film homeless people or do pranks, all I need to do is go down to my local Target or my local Starbucks and just go. Strap on the hidden camera, make my moves, and then post my video. It takes a lot less planning if you don't care about the subject. And so in conclusion, the makeup artist was a little appalled, but everyone else at the table, knowing my content better, they're like, yeah, what he's saying is dumb, but you will move faster if you are more exploitative of, service workers and homeless people.
We've unleashed Pandora's box because the more people who follow that path, more people see it. Mm-hmm. And the baseline for what is morally acceptable versus what isn't, it keeps shifting because you think to yourself, oh, maybe 10 years ago, these concepts would be like, oh, but now you're like, we're so used to seeing, hey, what do you do for a living?
Correct.
Hey, random person in the street, let me help you out. It's just becoming, oh yeah, of course I would do this.
Correct. That is one of the end products of the MrBeast effect. And that's what I meant when I said I'm fighting a cultural shift, is that I think when my son grows up in his generation, everyone is going to be constantly aware of the potential for cameras, which may be a good thing. But at the end of the day, the people who are going to be violated the most are going to be service workers and the underclass at the end of the day, because they have no recourse. Somebody brought up Cartnark to me. So they're like, what do you think of Cartnark? He films people without their knowledge. He yells at them when they don't put their carts away. And I said, Cartnark, I understand why people wouldn't like Cartnark. But at the end of the day, his subjects presumably have cars. They presumably are shopping for groceries. They're not desperate. That person has the ability to walk away and exit the scene. Cartnark has no legal grounds over them. It's a little goofy that he films strangers, but those people can get away. Whereas a homeless guy who's sleeping in his tent, you're walking up to his house. If he's sleeping on a bench, you're walking up to his bed. He has nowhere else to go. The park is his home. So it's definitely Cartnark, he may not be morally the best person, but he's still going after subjects with the ability to defend themselves. The lawn guys are similar. Mm-hmm. They knock on somebody's door. Can I mow your lawn? That person has the ability to close the door and not deal with it. But a Target employee, a Starbucks barista, a waitress, their job is to deal with that person. So whether you're tipping them $1,000 or whether you're pulling a prank on them, you're still using them as a target. And so many people do not want to be targets. I did this. I actually strapped a camera to my body and I went into a couple of different restaurants and I did the influencer thing. I said, I don't have $1. Can you help me? Nobody wanted to help me. First off, nobody wanted to help me. Second, I felt dirty because I was lying to people. And third, a woman saw the camera and asked me about it. I said, oh, I don't have $1. I said, I only have $1. Can I get a donut? And she's like, what's that camera there for? And I said, well, I'm a TikToker. I'm doing a YouTube thing. I'm doing an experiment. And if you give me a free donut, I'm going to tell you how nice you are. And then I'll give you $500. And to my absolute surprise, she said, please don't film me. And I said, no, I'm serious. Like I had the money because I wanted to do the thing. I was like, look, I've got $500 here. Pretty simple. Let me post this entire interaction. I'll give you the $500. She's like, I don't want to be on YouTube. And you understand the irony of that interaction was that I finally had proof. I had proof that just because you offer somebody money doesn't mean they want to be on camera. But I can't post it because she asked me not to. And I didn't even feel comfortable blurring the face or the voice. I tossed the footage. But unless you've gone out into the field, unless you've actually tried to film in public, you have no idea how many people hate it. I film in public all the time. And most of the time I do my best to avoid direct shots of strangers. But people who aren't even in front of the camera will tap me on the shoulder, be like, I don't want to be in this. Even friends of mine, I'll film my son, out at the park. And he's like, oh, you're going to put that on TikTok? I'll be like, yeah. He's like, oh, I don't want to be in this. you can't understand that unless you've done it. So to all the people who are on the side of these guys, I always say, look, you can settle this really easily. Grab the camera, grab the cell phone, just try it once. It'll only cost you $1 and see what happens. And I will tell you that they might respond well, but the odds of them responding well are much lower than what you think.
It's a reminder too, because you mentioned since we did our last podcast, you are now a full-time creator.
I would say I work 3 weeks a month as a creator and 1 week a month as an orthodontist still. Since the last time we spoke, now I live much more of a dual life, but I used to be an orthodontist for 3 weeks a month and a creator for 1 week a month. Now I've tapered down my hours at the office, and now I'm mostly a creator.
And
yes.
You've moved to LA.
Yes. So we live out in the suburbs. Honestly, we're really happy. LA's a great place. I've met amazing people here. It's been an extraordinary net positive.
I think of that, and I bring that up because your point was, imagine, wow, there are a lot of people out there who don't want to be filmed. Because in LA, everyone's willing to be filmed. It's basically assumed that there's going to be cameras around. To your point, you imagine a world where your son grows up and everyone's looking out for cameras. It already feels like that in LA. I remember one of the first times I came to LA to meet with a creator friend of mine. We went and got tacos, and he had his camera with him. He went and took his camera and he set it on the table next to us and just left the camera there. And I was new to this world, coming as a quote unquote person with a real world job, as you were as an orthodontist. I wasn't accustomed to this, so I didn't ask him about it. And later I saw he posted a vlog of the two of us sitting and getting tacos. And I was like, I was
funny.
like, I'm not opposed to this. I am surprised. Why am I surprised? He never asked me if it was okay to film, but because in his mind, it's so clear in this LA world. If I'm holding a camera, he wasn't trying to hide it. If I'm holding a camera very visibly and I set it in front of us, obviously, I'm filming you. Now, both of us have crossed over from that real world experience, which, by the way, a lot of creators don't have. A lot of creators, they're young and they grow into this ecosystem. This is the only world they ever known. And that's why I think some of their sense of boundaries, it's a little bit different. You are now in this creator world. And for yourself, you still have the previous context where oh, hey, this is a normal and it's weird and bad, but a lot of people don't. What I also think about, there's a quote from a biologist named E.O. Wilson. He says that we have Paleolithic minds, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. It is so much easier for us ever to now film and record content and put it out there. And as you said, we are lazy. That's why SSSniperWolf still has so many views, so many viewers. And the technology is just going to get better and better, but we're going to be just as lazy as we always have been.
I feel like the real moral question with that subject is going to be, how far do we take it? Once AI is good enough, and I think that's like 8 to 10 years out, where the AI actors and the AI filming is going to be indistinguishable from people, what happens when I decide to give to AI homeless people? You know what I mean? If we don't care, I find that one of the inconsistencies in this whole genre is we have to figure out where we draw the line between authenticity and non-authenticity, between faking it and non-faking it. And I don't know if there is an answer, to be honest with you. Like the people who defend fake pranks and the people who defend fake kindness content, they always say, well, they're trying to inspire others to do the same thing.
There's a message, a motivation.
But I think that message is actually bad. I think for the few people who may be inspired to do good, you're inspiring more people to lie. You're inspiring more people to film strangers. A YouTuber got shot recently. I'm not sure if you saw that, but this guy got shot because he was doing a prank on just a regular guy. And the context of that is super interesting because the person who did the shooting was a DoorDash driver. And DoorDash drivers get robbed a lot. So of course he's carrying, right? So he's carrying something valuable. He knows DoorDash drivers get robbed. Someone bigger than him walks up to him in the mall, starts filming him, no context at all, and there's 3 people surrounding him. He feels threatened. He starts to walk away. They follow him, and then he shoots the guy. What we're not understanding is that the YouTuber is being brought up in this MrBeast generation where he sees everybody as content because he's not funny. He's not a good person. He's not good at directing, acting, singing, swimming, but he sees someone he can put on camera. I try to make this point that the YouTuber was trying to make money off the guy. So he will make more money the more embarrassed the subject is. He wanted to intimidate him. He wanted to make him look bad because then the YouTuber could profit off it. It's not like a mugging, but in a way it's a type of robbery. He's taking that man's image and his voice without his permission in an attempt to make profit. I feel like that's another thing this generation is sort of not seeing, is that not all work is swinging a hammer. Work also occurs in the form of using your image and your voice. If an Instagram model takes one picture in 5 seconds with a lipstick brand that's sponsoring her, she may make $30,000 to $50,000, and it took her seconds. Is that work? I would say yes. Work is anything you offer to another that is valuable. You know what I mean? This podcast is work. It's valuable. I think people aren't really understanding that the value of work isn't just, building a house. It's not correct. The value of work is not just physical. So when you walk up to someone with a hidden camera or even a visible camera, if your plan is to make profit off that, you are making that person work whether they agreed to it or not. They are making profit for you because you are co-opting their image, you're co-opting their voice, and you are going to make a profit off them. Now, if you decide to share a fair amount of that profit with them, that's kind of fair play. But if your intention is not to do that, then you are exploiting them for their work. And that's, again, it's so hard to make young people understand this because it takes so many more levels of understanding it. It basically tries to drag them out of the content hole they're in and try to say, like, look, when an influencer buys a taco for a homeless guy, they spend, $2, $3 on that taco, and they give the taco to that homeless man. But the reason why you're emotionally engaged is because that homeless man has now given his voice, his look, his story to that influencer for profit. And even though you may not think it's work, because he's not swinging a hammer, it is work.
So here's an interesting question then. Say it's AI homeless guy. Is that now better because you're not exploiting and robbing a person of their likeness? You're just using AI-generated content.
I would say it's just as bad because now you're deceiving the audience. That's a good question. You're deceiving the audience because you're making them think you're a good person when in fact you've staged an entire script made to look real.
You're still robbing the audience now.
Correct. I always ask people this when a lot of debates happen, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm definitely refining my moral stance. And I feel like if you don't know whether or not something's moral, you should ask yourself 2 questions. 1, what does the pitch meeting for this look like? Imagine a boardroom of executives and you're pitching this idea. And then the secondary question, ask yourself, is anyone being deceived? And that anyone could be anyone in the equation, your crew, the subject, or the audience. So in the AI situation, imagine that boardroom. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy 30 tacos. We're going to give the tacos to an animation of a homeless guy who's going to cry and say he's got cancer, but that person doesn't exist. But the audience will think he exists. So now, obviously, that sounds dystopian, what I just said. But now, who's being deceived? Well, the audience is being deceived. I'm lying to them in the sense that now they believe someone got helped.
A false image of the world is being imprinted on the audience.
Correct. The audience being deceived is like a major element of that. And I feel like with a lot, like that's where we're losing our moral ground. Because, imagine that boardroom again. I'm going to go back to the lying about quantity thing. Imagine the boardroom. Okay, guys, we want to tell everyone we're giving out 10,000 meals to the homeless. That's great, but check it out. We want to save money, so we're going to give out 1 meal to the homeless. Sounds dystopian, right? So already we've got a dystopian sounding business meeting, and now who's being deceived? Okay, well, the audience is being deceived, so morally bad. Whereas if I say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give out 10,000 tacos to the homeless, we're actually going to buy 10,000 tacos to the homeless, and we're going to blur their faces to protect their privacy. That doesn't sound like a dystopian meeting to you, does it? Or maybe it does.
Not in the same way.
Exactly. So I mean, there's a lot of gray area, a lot of subtleties, and it has to be on a case-by-case basis. And then, if we blur the faces and we actually buy the thing, we're not deceiving the audience. Look, this is what we actually did. Here is a video of what we actually did. There's no gray area there. Whereas I find that some kindness influencers do like ad spots for like a train. So again, imagine the board meeting. And I'm referring to a very specific video. Imagine the board meeting. Okay, we want to advertise our train line. What should we do? Okay, we should find somebody disabled who rides the train often, and we should take them to Disneyland. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know this disabled guy. He rides the train. Let's do it. When we make the video, we have to pretend we've never met. So we're going to walk up to him and pretend like this is our first time meeting. Okay, so we're scripting it, and we are telling the audience that we don't know this man. We're going to give him a surprise. Well, now the audience has been deceived. They already knew the subject. And I'll do one last rant about this, and then we can talk about something else. But I think one of the biggest stories to hit in the last year regarding this was one that I think is very interesting. An influencer named It's Zozer, I believe, his name is Sam. He brought a kid with cancer to meet Travis Barker.
Wow.
And in the video, he approaches the father and says, "Oh, I don't have any money. Do you have anything for me?" And the father hands him $100. The influencer says, "I've got a magic stick," and gives him a drumstick. This stick gets you to meet Travis Barker. And of course, the child meets Travis Barker, and it's a very magical meeting. And the kid ended up passing away like a little while later. But that was not the first time they had met. Sam had seen the subject on television months before. He had contacted the kid. He had the kid make a video about how he's ill and wants to meet Travis Barker. And then the influencer reached out to Travis Barker's 17-year-old daughter. And then the daughter shows Travis Barker the video, and then Travis Barker says, "Set up a meeting."
Wow.
So they set up a meeting, right? And all this is in news articles. This is not me just making this up. So they set up a meeting, but before the meeting, the influencer tells the dad, "Look, we got to do this little play. I have to walk up to you. I have to pretend to not have any money. You have to give me $100, and then we'll make a narrative." And it's a very touching story, but it was a hire. When Sam saw that kid, on television the first time, he said, I want to find a way to hire this family, to put this very tragic story on camera. But he can't just cast the kid in a play because he's ill. He needs to develop a new narrative. And so who's being deceived? And the answer is the audience is being deceived. They believe that he saw a random kid in a wheelchair, said he didn't have any money, and because the dad is oh so nice, the child gets to meet his hero. And it just seems strange to me. If you and I are walking down the street and I see a kid in a wheelchair and I say, "Look, that kid looks like he's on his last legs. Why don't we go over and ask his dad if we can film him for a TikTok in exchange for him meeting a celebrity?" It feels predatory but the audience doesn't really get that story. And it almost seems like there's no way around it. Like if you don't script a thing, if you don't lie to the audience, you're going to be outmaneuvered by people who do. Yes. And that is what I mean by the cultural shift is like, it's very tough to explain this in a TikTok. It's very hard to explain this in a 60-second video. Like, "Oh, here's how the TikToker's lying to you." Because there's so many subtleties and so many moral gray areas that it's, without this podcast format, I think that unless somebody listens to this the whole way, they'll always rest on this defense. They'll say, at least someone was helped.
It's such an intriguing concept. You're still robbing someone. You're either robbing the person that is an unwilling actor in your work, or you're robbing the audience of their belief and understanding of the world.
You're right.
And when you described to me this whole Travis Barker experience, Brad, it actually reminds me, I did a podcast recently with a friend who's excellent. I think the world of him. And my biggest takeaway, his podcast style is very different from mine. When you and I do a podcast, we could live stream this. It's the same podcast.
Oh, yeah.
The editing is essentially non-existent. And frankly, that's what I thought all podcasts were like. I've been to podcasts where there's just a very specific set of questions that they want you to answer. And it's not really in the flow of a conversation. It's just like, cool, I'm just going to ask you these questions. Okay, that was an okay answer. Now redo it, but emphasize this more.
Oh, that's funny.
And now we're going to cut into the conversation so it looks natural. And it does really well. And I remember sitting there being like, yeah, totally it makes sense that it does well. Because The way we do it, it's actually a conversation. And yeah, if someone's scripting the podcast interview, but it seems authentic, I realize now, literally talking to you, I'm like, oh, that's why I felt a little like, feels weird.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it is very difficult to compete.
Yeah.
When you're willing to script a situation and make it seem authentic. Yes. And you know, that podcast, you said it does very well. And that's because they know what's going to work. They're like, you know what? You answer this way, you react this way.
5 questions, here are the answers, here are the things to emphasize.
Yeah.
Boom.
And these are the ones that work. And this is how we can promote, because at the end of the day, most podcasts are promoted via viral clips anyways.
Totally.
You know, and if you don't get a good soundbite, if you don't get something that can be explained in 30 seconds, then, you know, in a way, depending on your financial situation, you may consider your time to have been wasted.
Totally.
And again, I think the degradation of honesty is going to be one of the casualties of the new media empire. And for all the people who are helped, I do believe there's going to be an equivalent number of people who are deceived and lied to. So our net is neutral.
It's fascinating. You remind me, the philosopher Kant.
I love Kant.
Writes that to determine whether something is moral, it is not based on what you think God says or tied to the intrinsic humanity of you and I. It's tied to a principle called the categorical imperative.
I love the categorical imperative. It's like my favorite thing.
The categorical imperative, as you know, states that if something is truly just and moral, you'd live in a world where if everyone did this thing, nobody is hurt. Now, he has a very extreme version of this. He actually has examples around honesty, where he says lying is bad and being honest is good. Because, hey, if I allowed myself to lie to you now for the purposes of smoothing over social interaction, he's like, well, that's like categorical imperative. Let's apply this to everybody.
And chaos would ensue.
Exactly. Everybody could lie. And he's like, no, if everyone were honest, it's a better world.
Correct.
And he's a little bit controversial because there's a lot of examples where it runs up against people's traditional conceptions of morality. Say, for example, you are sheltering someone, your friend, and the police come to the door, and it's like a police state, and they're like, where's your friend? And you might be like, well, obviously I'm going to lie because I want to protect my friend. Kant would be like, no. The moral thing, like you can do whatever you want. You can lie, sure. But the moral thing to do is actually to tell the truth, because the categorical imperative dictates that the world is better if everyone's honest.
Well, I would argue that in a situation like that, if your friend is innocent and what they've done is just, and you're defending them from if you're defending them from an evil regime, then the categorical imperative would say, well, you should always help someone who's being hunted
by an unjust regime.
Correct.
Yes.
So if you're hiding your friend and he just got done with a killing spree, you should say that he's right back here. Please take him away. This is a murderer. But if your friend is being unjustly, pursued, then the categorical imperative would say you should lie to, you should defend your friend. I mean, again, we could go in circles about that, an entire thing. But I do love Kant. I do think the categorical imperative is something people need to understand. I feel like when you're young, utilitarian philosophy works really well.
Yes.
You focus only on outcome. You do a number of things regardless of your intention. If the outcome was good, you were good. And it's easy to quantify that, because you can quantify, like, I made this decision, I made more money. But that is an extremely selfish point of view. When we get older, I find that as I've gotten older, I've started to apply Kantian thought processes to a lot more of my decisions. And if I could tell young people one thing that I hope to impart on my son, is that no matter what your situation is, you will experience an easier and better life if you are honest. Whether it's relationships, whether it's business, everything in life gets easier if you cut out even little white lies, and it's hard to express that to someone who hasn't been through a lot of breakups or betrayals or business failures or people being shady to them. It's hard to learn that without experiencing the pain. When I was younger, I did not manage my relationships well. I cheated on people not infrequently. And one time I got busted. A girl caught me, and they actually tricked me into meeting up together so they could yell at me at the same time.
Both of them.
And the irony is they were both such cool women that they were like, I don't understand why you told us both we were exclusive. Like, You said, let's be exclusive.
Yeah.
If you had just been honest with us and like just wanted to casually date, we both still would have liked you. You could have potentially had both of us in your life as like productive friends and even romantic partners for almost as long as you wanted because we liked you. We hate you now because you lied to us. It was such a weird turn. Like I should have just been honest with them in the beginning. And it's not like I sweat it these days, but it's such a powerful message that like I lied for temporary gain. Whereas if I just stomached being honest, I wouldn't have hurt anybody's feelings. I wouldn't have experienced like causing irrational pain to those around me. And it applies in big situations and small situations. So when I raise my son, when he gets into like, questions on how to manage his relationships, I'll say, look, you should always be honest no matter what the situation is. Even if you think it's a short or long-term benefit, you need to be in the habit of telling the truth no matter what. I went on a tear there, but this is back to Kantian philosophy. If you live your life that way, I do believe you will experience like a utilitarian net positive that you may not see up until much, much later.
In a way, the focus on honesty for you, it's something that comes from personal experience. You've seen in your own life, had I been honest,
correct,
this would have been better. And I almost see, last podcast, we talked a lot about your villain origin story, right? Having seen some of the staged nature of Hollywood shows and showmanship, the narrative, right, was, it inspired you, like, well, I'm going to make my own content, play the game a little bit more, but now use the tools that they encourage against them. And I'm almost sensing there's like another very personal one here. It's like you yourself have not always been honest.
Correct.
And now know the value, importance of being so. And we live in a system where content is everywhere. We are lazy. It incentivizes dishonesty at scale.
Yes. Because I've lived a very crazy life in a lot of situations. And like the Scumbag Dad series started where the joke was that Scumbag Dad just used the audience. They were a means to an end.
Exploiting, quote unquote.
And that was part of the gag, is like part of the long-term vision of that project. I wanted to create a narrative where there was a parasocial relationship between the audience and Scumbag Dad and show how that was bad. But because I've got so much more life experience than a lot of my audience, I do feel like I want to defend them from grifters. I feel like I was lucky in the sense that, I sort of made it through a lot of like weird trials and tribulations. And now I want to save people time and heartbreak. I want to say, look, some of the people you're following are here to deceive you. And I know they're here to deceive you. And they know they're here to deceive you. And they know that I know that they're here to deceive you, but you aren't seeing it yet. And through satire and through call-outs, I'm trying to sort of encourage a more just world, because it does offend me when people take advantage of dumb idiots. It happens, right? But I feel like dumb idiots may just not have had the opportunity to learn, to get a good education, to have good role models in their life who encouraged a critical eye on things. And every dollar that these grifters lose because of me, I view as a victory. I view as a net positive towards creating a better world. And I don't always have the best takes, but I try always to be honest. And, if someone lies to you because they want to get profit, it shouldn't be easily forgiven. It should be something that you honestly think about. And just because you like them or think they're funny or think they're attractive on social media does not mean they deserve your attention and your dollar. And your attention and dollar is very, very valuable. So, I don't know, in my old age, all I want to do is make silly comedy action movies. But I find myself so inundated with so many grifters and so many liars that I don't know what to do about it. I feel like I'm the only creator, on TikTok at least, my size, that's regularly trying to point out grifters. And I've been doing that even since the old orthodontic days. Like those people were advertising these jaw exercisers that don't work, and I used to hit them all the time. But where the future goes, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, and a way too, your mission, your calling is to expose these grifters, but because you're unwilling to engage in their deceptive practices, it's even harder for you to get your message across. That's what you said. Like you have 60-second clips where you need to be funny and you need to be ironic to get your message across.
And some of them don't know how to interpret it. They're like, ha ha ha, funny joke, but they don't realize I'm addressing extremely specific questions that are coming up on social media. I'm addressing very specific weaknesses that people use. And you know, some people get the message, but it's just tough because it's hard to get them to go as viral as the people who are willing to lie.
You know what's wild, Brad? Is the same way your mission may or may not be similar to Dhar Mann's. Dhar Mann's is trying to teach morality to young children. In a way, you are too.
Yeah.
But he does so through constructed fables and situations. And you do so by the way you actually create content in the first place, which is be honest and don't stage things.
Yes, for sure. Dhar Mann's technique, I think, is a lot more sensationalized than mine because all of his stories involve sort of like measurable consequences. And I try not to, I don't think I even touch that area. All of Dhar Mann's stories are, man thinks that ugly woman isn't smart. Instant regret. Like he suffers very quickly for it. In a way, some Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes are like that as well.
That's true,
like where Larry David insults someone in the beginning, and that person turns out to have power over him. But that is, I mean, not to sound like but that is really not how the real world works. Sure, in very isolated situations that happens, but it's very rare that like the homeless guy on the street turns out to be the boss of the company that I'm interviewing for. Now that we talk about this, I realize that Dhar Mann is a very utilitarian-based content creator. He's like, don't be bad because you will get less money because the person you're mean to is the owner of the hospital. Whereas I'm saying, my message is a lot more vague because the consequences are not measurable. I'm saying don't be bad because if everyone's bad, the world is fucked up and grifters and dishonest people will be able to take your trust and take your love and take your money and use it to build themselves up. And like I'm on a freaking thread here because I see how easy it is to just strap on the camera.
It's like, what if you manipulated things a little bit more in the goal of getting that message across?
I know, and I could, but like I don't want to take that step. So it's accurate to say that I feel like Dhar Mann and I were definitely pursuing some sort of like fable for the youth, but his is very, what is it? Who's the guy who is like the big utilitarian philosopher?
Bentham. Jeremy Bentham.
Yeah, it's like very Benthamish, whereas I'm like much more Kantian, and I do feel like his is a lot easier to understand.
What I kind of love is that in a weird way, both you and he need each other to exist on the platform. Like you need Dhar Mann so that you can skewer him. In a weird way, I don't know if he needs you in a way, but I guess I'll frame it as
he doesn't need me.
He might not need you from a moralistic POV, but we, the people, society,
we need him
needs both sides.
Yeah, we need to either disagree or harshly disagree. I would say that I don't need any of these guys, to be honest with you, because I feel like I've been making content for a while. Like I can create a movie or a plot or a script very easily.
It's more just that you see the grifters out there and you can't help but, from a very personal place, be like, oh, I was going to make my funny comedy action movie, but like now I have to skewer this person because people are going to fall prey.
That's true. And my wife asks me about that not infrequently. She's like, because I'll usually start with a funny script and then I'll deviate it midway. Like, no, we're gonna make fun of the kindness guys. Because she asked me, she's like, sometimes you get heated over this. Like I put a lot of time and effort into trying to get people to see my point of view through comments and such. She's like, it seems like my targets are super random. She's like, why are you making fun of this person, but this person does the same thing? And I'm like, they're not doing the same thing. They're doing something similar. And I think it's because for whatever reason, I feel like I sense people who do what they love for money versus do something for money. I feel like, so I think one good example that's simple to understand is the Italian husband couples. There's no way that little Carlo as a kid was like, I really hope that my career is being an over-the-top Italian and messing up English words. I really hope that that's how I make my money. Right. I don't want to be a fireman or a lawyer. I just hope I marry an American and she breaks pasta all day. That's how I'll make my money. This you can't convince me that is Carlo's dream.
His passion.
They make money off it and people like it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for some reason, I sense the lack of genuine behavior in those, and I rip on them all the time. Some of my fans say that my Italian husband, mockery is some of their favorite content because I try to take it so over the top. Right now, we're planning on doing a skit called the Italian Husband Academy Awards, where it's like awards specifically for Italian husband TikToks, where this guy, welcome best new artist who reacts to the ravioli, and it's just the same script. So for some reason, I focus fire on those guys who I feel are not doing what they love for money versus the ones who are doing, just something because it's a cash grab.
What's so funny is I've never actually seen the original Italian husband content that you were mocking. I've only seen your content, and obviously I look at it and I'm like, okay, I assume he's making some fun of something.
Yes, I'm totally. There's multiple accounts.
Yeah,
like for. Having an Italian husband is a very easy way to get social media.
It's a way to make a living now.
Oh, for certain. It's like a legitimate job, but it's tough to apply that equation to almost any other race. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, that's where it gets a little dangerous.
It gets a little dangerous.
Like, here's my Chinese husband. I'd be giving you a lot of side eye. I'd be like, okay, please tell me more about the Chinese husband.
yeah. What does the Chinese husband do?
What are you expecting him to do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for some reason, the Italian husband stereotypes are so like, to some people, so harmless that they become an entire effective personality. And so I read that, and to me, even though they're not grifting the same way the other guys are, it's still a bit of a grift because you're just sort of staging your scenes with like a cute guy. And I do what I call light parody of those guys. Yeah. Like I make these fictional
you're not
scenarios.
Going hard like you do with Bentellect.
No, I'm not telling the world that they're bad people, but I'm saying that the world they're creating, if there is a legitimate genre of Italian husband content, then there should be Italian Husband Academy Awards. Right. There should be an Italian Husband Fight Club.
Let's continue the joke.
Yeah. Essentially, I'm doing, to me, in my, narcissistic point of view, I'm flexing on them by saying, I'm taking your joke and I'm making it way more over the top. I'm using actors and sets and I'm using my time to make like a funnier version of what you're doing. But there's no way I can compete with an Italian person just mispronouncing English words. That's the peak of comedy, apparently.
You mentioned that you think that earlier when we're younger, we start with a more utilitarian perspective around morality. And over time, as you've gotten older, it's become more Kantian. There's this system of moral reasoning. It's called Kohlberg's system of moral reasoning. It's how people develop a sense of morality. And the way it works is when we're young, we think things are moral if they feel good to us, like when we're kids. If this benefited me and I feel good, yay. And if it didn't, bad. And in a way, utilitarianism is like the more grown-up adult scaled version of that. Good for me, not. That's the first stage. There's 4. The second is, morality becomes what your parents tell you. It's like the immediate personal authority figures in your life. My mom says this. My dad says this. I assume that's what's right and what's wrong. The third stage is institutions, like the law. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I would never break the law because to be a good person is to follow it. The fourth and final stage is the Martin Luther King Jr. letters from Birmingham jail. It's, I have my own sense of morality where like the law might be wrong.
Oh yeah. If you're someone who considers morality to be only what's legal, then your system is completely crazy because there are lots of ways our legal system fails us. Yes. There are lots of things that it doesn't address. And for someone to say, it's not illegal, I can do it, is really crazy. Those First Amendment auditors are one of the most annoying people on YouTube. They'll go into public places, post offices, and just annoyingly film people and talk trash on them. And everything they do is legal, right? But that doesn't make it moral. It doesn't make it right. You know what I mean? Recently, there was a hot dog vendor who was posted online, and the influencer who filmed him made him look like a bit of a jerk. And then people review bombed his business. And somebody comes to me and they're like, no, he's allowed to film. It's legal. He didn't do anything wrong. I'm like, no. Just because it's legal to film someone does not make it good. Does not make you a good person. You're still using them for content without their permission or their knowledge. And some countries even do have laws that restrict you from featuring someone in a YouTube video without permission. So the problem with law is that it often is corrupted. It's constantly shifting. Laws in different countries vary. You can't use the law to make yourself seem like a moral person, because there's so many asshole behaviors you can get away with, and you can throw your hands up and be like, whatever, it's legal, I don't care.
Yeah. In fact, you mentioned there are countries that have laws prohibiting filming. Laws, but an imperfect way to enforce someone's perception of morality at a large scale. Would you prefer to live in a society that does have laws being like, no, do not exploit homeless people for content, or one where there's no laws and we have to rely on our own morality systems to hold us back?
I mean, that's a tough one, because if we lived in a society where we had no laws whatsoever, I do believe we would eventually have some sort of gang rule. I do believe that a government would spring up, you know what I mean? Because human beings, you know, we're exceptionally good at war, you know what I mean? Like that's something that we can't even deny. Every generation, like, we think we're always so good and special and like we've made all this social progress, but like wars and fighting still happen rampantly every day. And so I believe that if like all laws were thrown out and we had to live under our own morality, a new system of law would be created based on, you know, honestly based on violence.
Fascinating. So you don't believe necessarily that as humans over time we've become more moral naturally. It's more we've just have the accumulated societal institutions and trappings passed on from each generation to the next that are helping us be better.
I feel like it's tough to measure because you and I have never lived in a generation other than this one. But every generation seems to say, the world's going to hell. The world's going to hell, right? My parents' generation said that. I'm sure the World War II generation said that. I'm saying that. I'm sure my kid will say that. Like, for each bit of progress we make, we encounter new ways to hate each other. With each new technological advancement, we find new ways to exploit our fellow person. You know what I mean? So I will say, like, I feel like quality of life in certain countries does keep improving, but our ability to negotiate our own moral place in the universe, I mean, it's insulting to think we have that much more understanding of morality than like the ancient Greeks. You know what I mean? They still debated all this stuff. And sure, like now, due to technology, we can see more people and more cultures and understand each other. But we can also hate more people, and we can also be bigoted more. Because now we have ways to attack people far away. We can insult them online and bully them, and we can bomb farther away now.
What about your personal morality system? You talk a lot about, in a way, Scumbag Dad, although it was previously meant to be parodies of your Korean dad, it's now become almost paternalistic. I'm wanting to convey a certain moral POV to the next generation. For yourself, if you have gone through these life experiences, what helped you develop this sense of honesty, right? You mentioned that, hey, you previously had cheated before, and that experience helped you realize, like, why the f did I do that?
I feel like a lot of the world didn't have as many advantages as I did as a kid. I feel like a lot of people come from, you know, homes where maybe one or both parents might have not been present a lot. I feel like being raised by the TV sort of makes you into a person who's sort of receptive to commercials and messages very easily. I feel that as I've grown older and I've seen a lot more, you know, development on the internet, that a lot of the people with more selfish thoughts, they just weren't given a role model who trained them as such. You know what I mean? It's very rare to see someone come out like with a large platform who's sort of moderate. You know what I mean? Think about like a Ben Shapiro character. He's popular because he's inflammatory,
polarized,
super polarizing. And when I think of all the pundits and all the guys who shout online, Bill O'Reilly's and whatever, they don't come to the table with, you know, reasonable ideas. I feel like they will get fewer views because there's nothing to debate. If I come to a table and I say, look, why don't we be reasonable? Why don't we respect each other? That's totally cool. And I'm up against somebody who's like, nah, they did this bad thing. We need to eliminate all of them. They're bad people. The other person's going to get a lot more attention, just like Donald Trump got a lot more attention than anybody else. It's hard to see those characters in media because a lot of them don't succeed. And in fact, if I started with TikTok by just being this sort of like relatively moderate philosopher who just wants people to respect each other, I wouldn't have built a platform. I built my platform on comedy. I just happen to be getting into it this way because it's something I'm passionate about. I feel like there's not enough people who are being moderate in their philosophy and trying to encourage against grifters, because it's hard to build a platform that way. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and even yourself for your own content, for example, all the people in your video, they're willing participants. Like you bring in, you mentioned you've settled in LA, you now have a group of friends. You have musicians and comedians, OnlyFans models. You bring them in as willing participants in what you do.
They're all, everybody who I work with, like, is fully aware of the scope of who I am. And they agree to come and, like, yeah, sometimes I'll take them out to dinner or drinks and that kind of thing. But they know it's not always going to go viral. They're hanging out because we like to party, we like to have fun. And there's like a mutual respect. We're building a community of creators. And, you know, like I hang out with this guy. He helps me with my video. The next week I help him with his video. We're not like, negotiating with each other for money or anything. We're trying to build a big team, and it's working out great.
What's really fascinating is, so you have content out there with grifters who exploit unwilling participants in their videos. Correct. And someone could watch that and be like, this is a good video. Then they look at your video where you've brought in other influencers and models and friends, and they go after the people in your video.
Yeah. I do think it's funny. I do think it's funny because some people aren't understanding that it's meant to be a work of fiction. It's meant to fool you into seeing behind the curtain, to show you what the background of some of this content is. And when I feel like when some of my detractors see it enough, they get fooled by the initial 3 seconds of video. They start to see my point. They start to see how easily they are fooled. And that is one of the points I'm trying to make. I will say that I've turned quite a few people onto my side, but it's a grind. I need to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I've seen literally people comment when you did Italian Husband Fight Club. Comments were like, "Was your wife okay with this?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Well, obviously, because it's staged." Yeah. And I do think this is a really funny concept where if you become successful at teaching your audience to be suspicious, and they start in a way to even, I remember there were some comments being like, these are e-girls. Like, are they not profiting off your content?
Yep.
And the answer is kind of like, sure, yeah, what's wrong with that? Like, we're all willing participants. In a weird way, they're beginning to internalize, oh, I should be suspicious of the people in these sorts of videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, everyone on social media, or everyone acting my videos, like, we all want to gain something out of it. We all want to progress our careers, and we all want to do something. And working with OnlyFans models is absolutely fantastic because they are super duper cool. They are, pretty attractive, and they're down with dirty jokes. Mm-hmm. They're down doing dirty jokes. And my sense of humor is very, very dark. Mm-hmm. And to try and find, like, I guess, more traditional actresses who are cool with that, it's just a lot rarer. So, when I get a video go viral with an OF model, they're happy because they get a bunch of subs. I'm happy because I got a viral video, and I got, and I also got to build a new friend. And that, I feel like a lot of people are very harsh on the OF models, and they shouldn't be. They're not viewing them as people. They're just like, oh, well, she just shows her body for money. And I'm like, well, who's paying for it? It's just like,
it's you.
It's you. It's lonely guys who are like sort of bitter, who only view them as a body. And if you aren't giving them attention, you're probably giving the inverse of that attention, which is like the Andrew Tate, the alpha male sort of thing. The lonely single man dollar is one of the most powerful industries in the world. That's why OnlyFans exists. That's why the alpha male podcast and the Andrew Tates exist. They feed, whether you fund one or the other, they're feeding that need for you to feel good about yourself because you're in a certain state. And it, they apply to slightly different feelings, but I do believe that the people who fund Andrew Tate and the people who fund OnlyFans models are a very similar demographic. And good on them. Like, by all means, keep doing it because it's a service that's very profitable, and I got no problem with it.
There's this interesting point, like, money is but a measure of the value provided to someone, and that person needs to want to accept that value too. You are now a 75% full-time content creator.
Yeah.
25% orthodontist.
Yeah.
You make over 6 figures from your work as a creator.
Yeah.
And implicitly, that means you found an audience that so appreciates you skewering the industry of creators to now support you as a creator.
Ironically enough, yeah. It seems... I do view it as more of a job now than I ever did before, though. Like, in the initial days when I was doing this purely part-time, I had a lot more thinking time to make like the best or craziest skit I could because I wasn't dependent on money. But now that I'm part of the grind, I have to utilize the same tactics that everyone else does. You know, last time I was here, I talked about an infinite content concept, something that you can just repeat over and over and over to make money. And these days, yeah, I mean, skewering new trends is my way of doing the trend. A trend happens, and then I apply the Brad Padre formula to it. Does that make me moral or good? Questionable, but I'm still making it a fiction. For instance, I mean, one could say that all I do is I take a trend and just make it dark. So for instance, there was a trend where people said, oh, draw whatever you can in 7 seconds and I'll buy it for you. And of course they draw something, you know, they draw TV or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, what's the Brad equation? Well, draw whatever you want in 7 seconds and now it's something illegal. I want to draw, I'm with 2 women at once, or I want to draw, you know, I want to draw a girlfriend, or I want to draw illegal, you know, illegal psychedelics.
Yeah, drugs.
I want to draw drugs. And I've got one coming up where he draws a kidney, a human kidney. Oh. And so this will probably be published after that. But like, that's the Brad equation. Like you guys are painting the world with this brush that's saying, oh, how whimsical. You could be at the mall and I'll buy you whatever you want. But what if what you want is dark and evil? What if you want is drugs or women? Like, that's now become my genre. And I'm hoping to grind at this until I become famous enough to just be a musician or something.
Right.
Again, that still exists, but I don't feel like I'm there yet. Yeah. And for now, my main focus is building my community, earning money, and trying to make a better life for my wife and son as we are raised here. And I know my son, I hope that he appreciates that. I hope to get him like an in showbiz by the time he's old enough to want it. But it's very possible he won't want it and want to just play baseball, which is fine. But at least I'm giving him that opportunity. My dad, when I was growing up, he said, look, you're not going to make it in showbiz because we don't have an in. And he's probably right. And I could have lived my entire life being a very happy orthodontist and everything would have been fine. But now that we have this ability, now I can give my son the choice. You want to be a doctor? Go ahead. We have enough money to send you to college to be a doctor. You want to be a weird YouTuber? Good. I have enough know-how in the industry to help you as much as I can. So in a way, I think that the difference between me growing up and my son is I feel like I was never encouraged to do anything besides become a doctor, which is fine. But I feel like my son, I'll be able to give him slightly more options because I've already done like a nice professional white-collar job. And I feel like I've also gone into a bit of a crazier profession with all this social media stuff.
I love that. At the end of the day, Scumbag Dad is also just dad.
Yeah, I'm a fairly nice dad. I'm trying not to exploit my son for views. So my wife and I, we take a lot of just home videos of him. Yeah. TikTok forces me to make the videos at least 1 minute. And so I just add on just a generic video of the kid playing. And I'm like, oh, there you go. Monetization countdown, baby. And so it's a way of me still showing my family and showing that I'm wholesome without like forcing my kid to do anything. And I do like doing that. You know, I do think it's cute to show off my kid. I love my son, whatever. It's cool to be a dad.
On that note, thanks for watching. Woo! How do you feel?
Oh no, I feel good. It's fantastic. I love hanging out and doing podcast stuff.
We have interesting conversations.
Yeah, let's talk about Kant and Jeremy Bentham. All right, but I got nothing else to say. Have a great day.